They didn't just think I was a failure. They made sure everyone in the room felt the same way. My family made a public display of my flaws that night at my brother's engagement dinner. My father made jokes about the years I'd apparently wasted while I sat motionless with my napkin neatly folded in my lap. My brother grinned knowingly, as though the conclusion had already been established. My mother nodded in agreement. I remained silent. I didn't correct them or resist. I allowed it to occur. The fiancé of my brother then leaned in to ask me a question in a whisper. It seemed incredible how quickly the room grew silent. My mother even paused in the middle of her sentence. Take a moment to like the video, let me know where you're listening, and let me know if you've ever been undervalued by your own family before I reveal what happened next. Because everything changed in that abrupt silence. My name is Lauren Hayes, and in my family, a name was only significant if it was associated with big titles like investor, realtor, or broker labels that sounded profitable, stable, and respectable. Mine was not eligible. Only until someone needed an example of what not to be did they notice it as it drifted around the table like background noise. The dinner was held in a private downtown space that exuded success with its warm lighting, clean white tablecloths, hefty silverware, dark wood paneling, and servers who replenished glasses before anybody asked. This is the kind of location my folks loved. For them, the environment was more important than any I was sitting 2 chairs away from my brother, just far enough to avoid the spotlight, but close enough to hear every little comment. He appeared totally relaxed, self-assured, and ready to take on the role of future family leader. Naturally, conversations tended to favor him. It was easy for him to laugh. As always, my parents observed him with a mixture of comfort and pride. Nobody really inquired about my well-being, and before I could say anything, my mother intervened when someone glanced in my direction. She remarked, "Lauren's still figuring things out. The way someone smooths out a crease that only they have spotted." She stated it quietly. My father then made a comment about patience, saying that some individuals are just not meant to be under a lot of pressure. Believing they were being nice, they both grinned. I looked down at the table. I smelled the smoky aroma of cracked pepper and seared meat, heard the faint murmur of conversation coming from the dining room outside our walls, and saw the candle waver. I stayed stable by concentrating on little, everyday aspects. Years ago, I discovered that if I remained silent long enough, people would talk freely as if I didn't exist. Sitting across from me was my brother's fiancée. She made no attempt to control the space. She examined it. She listened to my parents without interjecting. She slowed my brother down and made him think when he talked about his job. She observed tone, pauses, and what was left unsaid in addition to words. My father once made a joke about how different my life had been. The table shook with courteous laughter. The familiar sensation of being reduced to a story someone else was telling for their own comfort made my chest constrict. I refrained from interjecting. I didn't stand up for myself, not because I was weak, but rather because I was worn out from describing a life that no one wanted to hear about. Silence had become second nature to me. Nobody present realized that this supper was more than simply another duty for me. It was a test, to see how long I could sit in a room meant to ignore me, and to see what would happen if someone eventually saw the cracks under the polish. My name had usually came last in discussions about success. It was only added like a footnote that no one intended to read, without any announcement or appreciation. In essence, nothing was different that evening at the restaurant. It was just noisier. My parents leaned forward and affirmed each sentence as my brother described his future. By adding his own comments, my father elevated commonplace achievements to the status of legends. When my mother thought she was exhibiting the perfect family, she would put on the rehearsed smile. Occasionally, one of them gave me a fleeting glance, just enough to remind me that I was still there, barely visible in the picture. I was pulled back in time by their voices. A few months prior, when I unlocked my phone, I saw pictures from a networking event at my parents' place. People in fitted jackets gathered by the pool, enjoying drinks on the patio and laughing heartily. I had not received an invitation. My mother seemed genuinely startled that I had seen it when I later questioned her about it. It was very technical, she claimed, and she didn't want me to feel uncomfortable, as though being left out were a favor. The holiday barbecue came next, paper plates drooping beneath food, heat in the air, and charcoal smoke sticking to everything. My father's voice interrupted the music as I was conversing with someone at the fence. Once more he was bragging about my brother, the company, and the family history. Then he made a joke about me, not out of pride. The grins around me became uncomfortable. Someone grabbed my arm in the manner that people do when they believe you've lost something important and everyone is aware of it. Not everyone follows the conventional route, my brother said. raising his glass back at the dinner table. Even though he stated it in a light-hearted, even casual manner, his eyes flicked in my direction, drawing the line. Tight behind my ribs, that pressure came back. There was an overwhelming want to speak, to change the narrative, to say something scathing enough to stop them. Rather, I took a calm, deliberate breath. I tightened my grip on my hands. I had discovered that responding would simply give them greater authority. I still had silence, at least. The offers were more painful than the jokes. My brother had called me before the engagement meal, sounding cautious and empathetic. He stated he didn't want me to feel ashamed and asked if I needed assistance choosing something appropriate to wear. Beneath his concern was a clear message. I was a problem that needed supervision. My mother leaned closer, my brother's fiancée at the table, and discussed my future as though it were an unsolved matter. She made reference to stability and implied that one day someone would assume responsibility for me. She placed a light, claiming hand on my shoulder. Something changed at that point. I didn't look up. Rather, I paid attention to my calm, steady heartbeat. I remembered all the late evenings spent working by myself. I was unable to explain the cause, the decisions I had made without consulting anyone. They thought I was confused because I was silent. My tolerance was interpreted by them as reliance. My brother's fiancée had ceased grinning across from me. She was paying attention instead of just politely watching, and I realized for the first time that night that the version of myself they had been reiterating was running out of room. When my mother's fingers lingered too long, I remained silent. When my brother nodded, I didn't look at him, as though my future had just been decided. On the outside, I remained calm, pleasant, and motionless. Something inside at last made sense. In actuality, my life had never been as precarious as they had thought. It just didn't look like theirs. My days had a different rhythm when my parents held dinners and talked loudly about growth and reputation. Nights blended into mornings. The only sounds in my flat were the gentle buzz of my laptop fan and the sporadic vibration of a call from a different time zone. Subtle signs of progress included contracts that were signed, monies that were processed, and short notes that said, *, we're going forward. There was no audience, no applause, only momentum. I never told anyone about it, not because I was ashamed, but because I had to. Discretion was needed for the work. Deals remained brittle. Months of work could be undone by a single thoughtless sentence. I grinned and turned down my family's offers of support, money, and advice. It was safer to be undervalued than to be exposed. I realized how totally they had misinterpreted me that evening as the talk went on around me. They assumed failure when they saw my rented abode. They saw submission in my modest attire. They were never able to witness what was being constructed. The self-control required to maintain silence while constructing something that was vulnerable to disruptions. Satisfied, my brother reclined on his chair. My dad motioned for another round. After agreeing on seating arrangements, my mother continued talking about upcoming holidays. They were relaxed, self-assured, content with their certainty. Even before a word was said, I could feel the shift. My brother's fiancée, seated across the table, had ceased to participate in the family story. Steady and methodical, her gaze kept returning to me. She had stopped paying attention to what was being said. She was observing what wasn't the pauses, the self-control, the times I opted for quiet over silence. That look was familiar to me. On previous calls, I had witnessed people suddenly realizing their presumptions were incorrect. I inhaled deeply for the first time all night. Not because I thought someone would intervene. Not because I required approval. However, I realized something crucial. Things that are beyond the control of others don't often show up immediately. It waits sometimes. Dinner continued, but the tide had already turned. My parents continued to tell their version of the tale while they spoke. My brother was still self-assured, but beneath the surface a thin tension had developed, like a wire that had been stretched a bit too tight. I remained seated. I said nothing. I understood exactly when standing would be important, not because I was trapped there. Unaware that the mood had shifted, the server came back with another round and carefully set the glasses on the table. Eager to take back the room, my father swiftly raised his glass. To family, he grinned widely. And 2 fresh starts. Except for me, everyone echoed him. A moment later, I lifted my glass just enough to stay out of sight. I had learned to stay half a beat behind in order to survive situations like this. My brother started talking about his goals in another monologue. A larger home, increased accountability, a bigger future. He spoke with the assurance of someone who had never faced opposition. My parents rushed in and completed his phrases, refining each concept until it shone. My father abruptly added, "And Lauren," pointing at me as though recalling an afterthought. While she's always been self-sufficient, it was deliberate to pause before that word. My mum chuckled quietly. My mother said, she prefers doing things her own way, in the same tone that people say for behaviors they hope would ultimately change. All we want is her safety. It's not an easy world. I felt the familiar tightness in my chest tightened, the urge to shrink. I looked down at the tabletop, following the grain of the wood, and saw a little scrape close to my plate, anything sturdy to keep me grounded. My brother's fiancée didn't turn away from me, as though a piece had just come into place. She cocked her head slightly. "Lauren, what is it that you actually do?" She then calmly and clearly inquired. It was a weighty question. It wasn't polite curiosity or light conversation. It was accurate. My brother laughed before I could answer. He interrupted. "It's complicated, a technological issue. She's trying new things." With obvious relief, my father sprang on the opening. Many people attempt such activities. It's a challenging field. My neck began to get hot. I said nothing. The fiancée did not grin. With her gaze remaining on me, she inquired, "What kind of platform?" The silence that ensued was strange, perceptive, and acute. My parents moved about in their chairs. My brother's throat was cleaned. My mother touched my arm once more and remarked, "She's very private. She dislikes discussing it." At that moment the fiancée leaned forward and deliberately lowered her voice to alter the mood. She asked me directly, "Is it related to logistics?" For the first time in a few minutes I looked up. "Yes," I said. Just one word, steady. Her brows raised a little. "Worldwide." I gave a nod. Once more, my brother laughed more loudly than was necessary. "You see, that's what I mean. Incredibly ambiguous." She gave him no attention at all. She became more focused and professional. Optimization of the supply chain. My heartbeat slowed. Yes. The silence grew more intense. She exhaled slowly while maintaining eye contact. Then she said something loud enough for everyone to hear. "Hold on." You're in the middle of her speech. She stopped herself. The impact was immediate. Nearby conversations came to a standstill. Halfway to the lips, glasses froze. Even the restaurant's background sound seemed to falter, as though the space had taken a breath and forgotten how to release it. My dad scowled. "What is it?" he said, his voice beginning to sound irritated. The fiancée straightened. "Lauren Hayes," she uttered cautiously. "Are you not the founder?" Nobody said anything. I nodded slightly as I met her gaze. My brother's scream fell halfway between panic and astonishment. "Founder of what?" he insisted. She didn't respond to him. Rather, she took her phone out of her bag and began to scroll with ease. The headline appeared to fill the gap between the plates when she rotated the screen to face us. An article from the industry. No pictures of myself, only statistics, forecasts, and investor remarks complimenting a founder renowned for avoiding the limelight. She moved the phone to the middle of the table. "This is one of the most closely watched platforms in the sector right now," she stated calmly. "Launch quietly. Outstanding early performance, attraction and global reach." My dad squinted at the television as he leaned in closer. My mum's smile vanished completely. The fiancé went on, "We've been trying to get a meeting for months. No media, no interviews, just outcomes." My brother gave a head shake. That isn't when he noticed that nobody was watching him anymore. He stopped. At last, she turned to face him. She remarked, "You said you wanted me to meet visionaries." She didn't use a sharp tone, which would have been simpler. It was measured and serene. I was surprised to see one seated across from me. The table became still, as though it had come into contact with something scorching. My mother's hand slid off my shoulder. Her mouth parted, then shut again. She made another attempt but was unable to find the right word. With his face losing color, my father straightened. His voice was dulled by perplexity as he asked, "Why didn't you tell us?" I didn't respond right away. I carefully put my glass back down after lifting it and taking a tiny drink. I said, "You never asked." My brother's chair scraped the floor as he pulled it back so forcefully. He yelled, "This is crazy. We would have known if this were true." Once more, the fiancée looked down at her phone. She answered simply, "That was the point. You didn't." My brother's expression changed, but it wasn't rage, fear. The restaurant gradually came back to life all around us. The forks clinked. Discussions started up again. However, it seemed as though our table was hidden behind glass. Now people were whispering and staring. Unexpectedly, I felt steady and detached. I responded in an even voice. I didn't hide it to prove anything. I didn't need permission, so I kept it a secret. My dad took a swallow. With her fingers clenched, my mother gazed down at the tablecloth. I got up and smoothed my napkin before putting it neatly next to my plate. The gesture seemed decisive and purposeful. I stared at the fiancé after saying, "I should go." I enjoyed meeting you. She gave one nod. Her expression was obviously respectful. I stopped looking at my family. I was not required to. The quiet followed me as I left the private area, not the old quiet that disregarded me. This one weighed more uncomfortable, earned. Nobody spoke behind me, and that quiet seemed like justice for the first time in my life. When I went outside, I didn't hurry. The night air touched my skin like a reset, feeling colder than I had anticipated. After a block of walking, I stopped and let the sound go away. In my hand, my phone vibrated once. I didn't look at it. I'd thought for years that this would end with yelling or an apology. Rather, it came to nothing. And for some reason, that was heavier. The silence persisted in the days that followed. No group texts from the family. No well-crafted messages that act as though the night never happened. My mother's voice faltered when she eventually called. Her inquiries seemed more like attempts to regain equilibrium than genuine interest. I gave a polite, succinct response. I no longer filled the void for her. My brother didn't get in touch. I heard firsthand that the story of the engagement supper was altered to maintain pride, making it difficult in I allowed it to be revised. I didn't require praise. Distance was what I needed. The thing that shocked me the most was how much lighter everything felt after I let go of their expectations. Calls, choices, and forward momentum were all part of my work as usual. That remained the same. The clamor inside of me, the continual bracing, the need to prove myself to those who had already made up their minds about who I was, did change. I realized something crucial at that point. Reconciliation isn't necessarily a sign of closure. Knowing precisely where you finish and where other people's opinions begin can sometimes seem like clarity. That evening, I did not lose my family. The version of myself that kept shrinking to suit their narrative vanished. I also don't miss her at all. I used to think that I would feel whole if my family embraced me. I now see that gaining a seat at their table was not nearly as important as understanding myself. I wasn't changed by that night. It made me visible. You're not alone if you've ever felt undervalued by those who should know you the best. Tell me how you were able to hold your ground and where you are listening. And to ensure you don't miss the next one, subscribe if stories like these speak to you.